Parshas Lech Lecha speaks about Avram's journeys. Lech Lecha means Hashem sent him on a journey, kept on journeying from place to place until he reached Eretz Yisrael. And even after he reached Eretz Yisrael, he was traveling from place to place, spreading the word of Hashem. He went to Mitzrayim, he went to Egypt. He also made them aware of godliness. And the divine journey, the divine directive of Lech Lecha, that a person should travel, is applicable to every single Jew, to the Jewish nation as a whole, that every single Jew has his particular place, his particular designated area where Hashem sends him in life, for whatever reasons might appear on the surface, for business, for pleasure, for whatever other reasons he might find himself in a certain place. But the ultimate purpose why Hashem sent him there is in order to elevate and refine that part of the world, the divine sparks, mystical concept of the divine sparks which are scattered throughout the world, which are elevated throughout the Jewish people, throughout their service of Hashem for the past few thousand years. This is not only applicable to every single individual Jew as individual, but it also is applicable to the Jewish people as a whole. One of the main reasons that Kabbalah Chassidus explains are the inner reasons for exile, why the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel, wasn't merely as a punishment for their sins, but it was in order to bring about this elevation of the world, that the Jewish people traveled around the world and were scattered around all distant parts of the world, and the purpose is to elevate the divine sparks that are there. Just like the first exile, the exile of Egypt, the Jewish people were there for 210 years, and when they left, they came out with great wealth, which spiritually symbolizes the divine sparks which they elevated and refined. And since they finished elevating all the sparks in Egypt, Hashem commanded them that they're not allowed to return to Egypt. Why? Because they had nothing more to do there. They elevated the sparks. Which means that every single place a Jew, the same way it was by the exile of Egypt, this teaches us that every single exile, when the Jewish people were exiled to a certain country, a certain place, the purpose isn't just merely as a punishment, but because they had a mission to elevate that particular place. If we look closely at the history of exile, we clearly see a pattern emerging, that the Jewish people travel from place to place. First one country let them in, and then that country expelled them, and then they then they would go to another country, only later to be chased out to a third country, and so on and so forth. And similarly, we find regarding the centers of Torah scholarship. For many generations, the centers of Torah scholarship were in Babylonia, the area of Iran, Iraq, where the Gemara was written, the Babylonian Talmud was written, and later the Torah centers moved to other places, to Europe, to Spain, and so on and so forth. And we clearly see a pattern emerging that the Jewish people remain in one place for many years, and they're very successful physically and spiritually, and then all of a sudden, at one point, things change for whatever reason, they move on to another place. And whatever simple things we could observe that, what might explain why that happened, but the inner reason is because there's a divine hand of providence which is leading the Jewish people from place to place, elevating the sparks in each single place. Now, if we look throughout history, we realize that we're holding at the end of this service. Why? Because throughout history, the Jewish people traveled from place to place. There were many places that they didn't reach. For example, for many years, the Jewish people lived in Russia. But during the Tsar's time, there was a famous Pale of Settlement. The Jewish people were confined to a certain strip of Russia. There were not very few Jews who were permitted to go out of that place. And only later did it reach a time that every single Jew was allowed to travel throughout Russia. And when this happened, the Frierdiker Rebbe pointed out that this shows that we have now a chance to refine more sparks. Similarly, there's countries of Australia and America, countries that were only inhabited by the Jewish people in recent history comparative to the 2,000 years of exile. So this also reflects the concept that at this point in history, the Jewish people are throughout the whole world, where, as the Rebbe said, we're definitely finished this mission of refining the world. And that is why we clearly see at this point that the Jewish people already went in each single place, and now particularly there's no place, just about no place, where there's no Jews. And we've succeeded in fulfilling this mission of elevating the sparks. And now it's time to return to the land of Israel. And this is also the meaning of Kibbutz Golis, the return of the exiles that the Torah prophesizes, simply refers to the return of the Jewish people from their land, from their exile back to their land. But on a deeper level, the exiles refers also to the divine sparks that were embedded in creation from the time of creation, that there's divine sparks, divine energies that were invested in the physical world. And they're in exile because their true purpose, their true connection to godliness is hidden. And throughout the Jewish people's divine service in exile, we've elevated these sparks, and the return of the exiles also represents the return of the sparks to their true place, which will come to fruition with the coming of Mashiach. A person could say, where do we see, it sounds very nice and well, but where do we see that this divine service of 2,000 years reached this desired effect? So one thing that we see is that today's day and age, even though there's still anti-Semitism and the world is far from rosy, but in the years ago, there was certain countries where it was forbidden to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. There was always religious persecution. Today, even though there's still remnants of different elements of religious persecution, however you want to put it, but in general, as a whole, in the world at large, this concept of religious persecution doesn't really exist. The Jew has the ability to fulfill Torah mitzvahs in any place that he wants, in the places that he lives. Similarly, we look at the world as a whole, we definitely see that throughout history, the nations in general are much more inclined to war and to fight. And as time goes on, we definitely see a shift in the mental understanding of people. People are interested in unity and globalization, in the concept of living with peace with each other. And whatever reasons we might try to attribute this to, at its core, it's as a result of the service of the Jewish people for 2,000 years in exile, refining the world, that this brought about this fundamental change, both with regard to the ability to fulfill Torah mitzvahs and also with regard to the way the world itself thinks. The Eibusher should help that we should all fulfill our mission, we should all make our ultimate journey, the journey from Galus back to Eretz Yisrael, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, take it from Yad Mamash.